Okay, this is the May 2011 F582. The case study is looking at Argentina and the United States of America. So if you are comparing two economies together, it says until the 1930s, Argentina and the US had similar macroeconomic performance. So it's saying at some point in the past, their economies are very similar. Both countries are in the top 10 richest countries in the world, and both are expected to do well. Both the USA lived up to those expectations. Argentina did not, and the two economies followed very different paths. The USA opened its economy to free trade, so it's implying that it's benefited from trade and less tariffs and protectionism. This approach led to an increase in competition in US markets, so it's saying that competition has drove increases in economic growth and provided US consumers with more choice. So again, a benefit there of free trade and imports. Argentina, however, used tariffs and quotas to reduce imports, which is examples of protectionism, and more recently has even imposed taxes on its exports, so export tariffs as well. By 1990, the USA had a gross domestic product per head, so divided by the population, 8 times that of Argentina. In the late 1990s and the early part of the first decade of the 21st century, the USA experienced rapid economic growth, low unemployment, and price stability. So it's achieving 3 of the macroeconomic objectives. In contrast, during the same period, Argentina experienced falling GDP, so recession, high inflation, and rising unemployment, so not satisfying basically. And it failed to pay off more than 49 billion in foreign loans, so that was a government deficit and debt, and spending on capital goods declined, lack of investment, growth in spending by households started slow, consumption increasing but slowing down. It goes on to say, in the latter part of the first decade of the 21st century, the picture started to change. The USA suffered an economic downturn, so recession, rising household debt, and increasing unemployment. It also increased its budget deficit, so government spending was greater than its taxes, and an increasing deficit on the current account. So the value of import was greater than the value of export. In contrast, Argentina experienced relatively high economic growth, falling unemployment, budget surplus, and current account surplus, and a reduction in poverty. So achieving all macroeconomic objectives and reducing poverty. By 2009, however, both countries' performance had changed and both encountered difficulties. And then it's giving you some data about each of the economies here. So if we look at the data, you can see the comparison from 2008-2009. There was negative growth in Argentina, but America has improved. You've got an inflation rate which is high in Argentina, and it's still high even though there's a recession, which is a worry. America is in a potential period of deflation in terms of its annual inflation change in CPI. The unemployment measure is increasing. It's significantly increased in America. Current account balance is positive but slowing. America's is negative but improving. The budget balance of the government has went into a deficit in Argentina, which went into a significant deficit in America. It then goes on to say, in its February 2009 budget, the US government increased its spending, cut income tax rates for low and middle income earners, and raised the rate for higher earners. So they are trying to pay off their deficit through progressive taxing, but also trying to stimulate their economy through some fiscal policy. The US interest rate had already been driven down to almost zero, so stimulating the economy through expansionary monetary policy. Argentina is also pursuing expansionary fiscal policy and monetary policy, so the same as the US. Some economists have expressed concern that such approaches would not necessarily help them to achieve all of their objectives. So it's saying that they may lose, there may be a conflict. And they urge both governments to remember the importance of not only increasing aggregate demand, but also increasing aggregate supply. Potentially, we've got some analysis and evaluation around the difference in those two policies. Okay, so the first question we've got is what is meant by international trade? what we have is the exchange of goods and services between economies. Globally. 2 marks, straightforward. We've then got a question using information from the case study. So it's wanting specific examples, identified 2 methods of trade restriction. The 2 that they mentioned were tariffs and quotas. The next 2 questions, again, 1 question, define the term gross domestic product per head. 3 marks, so we're looking for 3 key parts. GDP is a measure of output, income, and expenditure. So the total amount of that for an economy over a period of time or across 1 year, and then divided by the population. That's the part in terms of per head. The next question, describe 2 economic costs of rapid economic growth. This question is worth 6 marks, so 3 marks for each of the 2 economic costs. And 1 key one would be the rise in demand for inflation. And the cost itself would be the reduction in consumers' standard of living. So why it's a cost. You want to take that through the rising price of goods and services. And back that this reduces the purchasing power for an individual household, which means they can buy less goods and services based on their income. So the income itself remains constant, and this will reduce the standard of living. The other thing that we could look at in terms of economic costs of rapid economic growth is negative externalities. And if you look at negative externalities, you are looking at potentially the costs to the third parties of the pollution. There will be an opportunity cost to the government of this, so it will be an increase in government spending, but not the kind of government spending that adds to economic growth. This is defensive spending, which is just solving problems. So it just cancels it out. So there's an opportunity cost there. There's no increase in number of demand, so you're sacrificing economic growth to solve negative externalities. The next question is, again, using information in the case study, so you want to find examples. Describe what happened to consumer expenditure in Argentina in the late 1990s and early part of the 21st century. Now, one key part to look at here, if we go back up to the case study, is so you're looking for the date and you're looking for what happened. Now, it says 1990, so we've got this paragraph here, which is looking at in 1990, in the late 1990s, and then it talks about Argentina. It's really important that it's not a reduction, but it's a slowdown in spending from consumers. So we go back to that question. 2 marks. Describe what happened to consumer expenditure in Argentina in the early part of the first decade of the 21st century. If we go again back up to that part in the case study, you've also got the second part of that. So Argentina experienced relatively high economic growth, budget surplus and current account surplus, and the reduction in poverty. It's likely then, because also high economic growth, falling employment, the consumer spending would rise. So you've got a slowdown to start with, but then a rise after it. So the key part to that question, which is 2 marks, is that first of all, you've got a slowdown, not a fall, and then you've got a rise. Explain the likely relationship between changes in consumer expenditure and investment. And this is worth 4 marks. You don't have to evaluate it, We're just looking at the effect of a change at this side to investment over here. And at A2, we did the multiplier and the accelerator. It's kind of that model explained. What you're looking at is the increase in consumer spending. It means that there's more demand or more aggregate demand for domestically produced goods and services. This will increase the output of businesses to meet that. And when that either increases retained profits or it gets to full capacity, then a business is going to invest, and they will invest for the incentive to create more profit, or they will invest because they need to invest to increase that output beyond their capacity. So this is the step which most students miss. This one also as well, that there's an increase in output from the business, which will use it at full capacity first. We've then got a few questions on figure one. Two of them are described questions, one of them is explained. The described questions are just looking at you describing what's happening with the data. Now, you need to look at rises and falls if you're looking at between two parts. So we've got 2009 and 2008, what happened to the price level in Argentina. So if we look back at the case study, price level, we've got inflation rate. And now remember, inflation rate is the percentage change year on year. So there is an increase in the price level. It's just increasing at a slower rate. So the price level is the average of all prices. Inflation is the rate at which that changes. So that's 9.7% greater than 2007. That's 9.1% greater than 2008. So the price level has risen. In the USA, as it's a negative, the price level has fallen. So the price level has risen and the price level has fallen between those 2 years. That's really important, the difference between rate and price level. Okay, there's a slowdown in the increase there, but there's a fall there. Okay, the next question, looking at the data, we're saying describe what happened again between 2008 and 2009 with a budget balance in Argentina and the United States. So if we go back up and we look at the budget balance, this one here, so we're describing it in terms of the change. So Argentina has went from a surplus to a deficit, whereas the US's deficit has increased. So then 2 marks, quite straightforward answers to those two. And the last one says explain whether it is possible to conclude that there were fewer unemployed people in the US than Argentina. Now that means a number. So if there are 100 million in the US, are there less than 100 million in Argentina in 2008? So again, we need to go back to the figures and see what we have here. Now, all you have here in the figures is an unemployment rate. So you've got 8% of the population up to 8.4, and you've got 5.7 up to 9.4. You don't have any information on the size of their populations. So in that question, explain whether it is possible. Well, no, we can say that there's a change in the rate, that Argentina's gets worse a little bit, but the USA's gets worse by a lot, but you don't know the size of the population. So you're unable to conclude that there are fewer unemployed people in the US than there are in Argentina. The next two sets of questions, one is an explain question. Explain why changes in income tax implemented by the US government may have caused inflation. If you remember in the case study, they talked about taxes going down. So the effect on taxes going down will either be that consumer spending or investment will increase as consumers have more disposable income and businesses have more retained profit. As consumption and investment increases, this will increase aggregate demand. It's only 3 more questions if you want to draw a very quick aggregate demand and supply graph. You've got demand pull, inflation, caused by that. And the next question is a comment question. And let's just have a quick look. It's worth 6 marks. So that will mean 3 marks for analysis and 3 marks for evaluation. And comment whether a cut in income taxes will always, and that is the real kind of key part to this question, is the word will always result in a budget deficit. And on one side, what you're going to have is the explanation of why that agrees. So yes, less taxes will equal a budget deficit, but on the other side, you will also need that less taxes could cause a budget surplus, and that will give you your 2 sides. But cutting taxes will lead into a budget deficit, but if you've got less income tax and less corporation tax, then if you reduce that amount and it ends up that the tax revenue is less than the government spending, then yes, you will have a budget deficit. So if you've reduced that part below that part, that's going to get a budget deficit. And on the other side, you could argue that the cutting, you might already have a large budget surplus. So the budget surplus is $100 billion. You might reduce taxes, but only reduce it. So you've got a smaller surplus. So one answer to this question is no, you could just have a smaller surplus. And the other way to look at it is that the cut in taxes might actually increase consumer spending. So the government gets more back in VAT. So you actually increase the amount of your budget surplus as well. And that would be because there is still more revenue, government revenue, than government spending. It's really important to mention that last part to explain what the government budget surplus is and what government budget deficit is. Okay, the next question is again a comment question. So there'll be at least 2 comment questions on this paper. This one is worth 7 marks. It's saying comment whether there is a conflict. So what a conflict means is you solve one macroeconomic objective, but you lose out on the other one. So you've got one benefit, and the benefit in this one is reducing unemployment, but the cost is that you lose the ability to reduce inflation. And again, as it's a comment, it's 2-sided. On one side, you are going to look at how reducing unemployment will cause inflation, and this is essentially demand for inflation. So as you reduce unemployment, as the level of employment increases and income rise, there will be more consumer spending. And as there's more consumer spending, this will result in demand. You've got demand for inflation as the price level increases year on year. Another way to do the opposite side is to look at a graph which may be along the supply side of the economy, which if there is increases in aggregate supply at the same time as the unemployment reduces, this increases the total capacity of the economy. And it would be good to talk about this being investments maybe in physical capital, because that will potentially not affect unemployment, allow you to reduce unemployment at the same time, and it takes the price level down. So you can have the increase in unemployment. So the increase in employment, the reduction in unemployment, with the price level falling at the same time. This brings us on to the last more question, the discuss question. You should have at least 30 minutes left at this point, and you need to do a very quick plan before we start this. Discuss the effectiveness is the 2 sides of lowering the rate of interest. So you know this is monetary policy to increase economic growth. So we're going to explain the graph, which again would be a demand side graph, to demand side policy, increasing aggregate demand, really one, and rising real GDP along the bottom axis. So you could use real output here, either Y1 or real GDP. The key part to explaining the change there is around what the effect is of the lower interest rate. Now, you could do 1 point around consumption, You could do 2 points if you have time around investment. And if you have lots of time, you could even do a point about how it improves the trade balance. And what you are looking at essentially is the relationship for the top two between saving and borrowing. We want to talk about incentives. So there is an incentive to borrow as the return for savings goes down and the cost of borrowing goes down as well. And you can also talk about new and existing loans. So if people want to take out new loans, then they can do so because they are cheaper. But the people with existing loans, their repayments are the things that go down. So there is new spending from new loans, but there's also increases in spending from people having less to repay. And also that means that businesses, the cost of their production goes down because interest is a cost and they can invest in it. Exports and imports, lower interest rates will cause a weak pound. When you've got Rapidic, weak pound imports, dear, exports cheap, they become relatively cheaper internationally and more spending will go onto our goods and services. If you're looking at the effectiveness of interest rates, you can do it from one of those three different points of view. So you could say that there is unlikely to be any increase in consumer spending if already the level of debt within the economy is high. So if everyone has a huge amount of debt, then they cannot take on any more debt. Banks won't lend to them, or they just not want to take on a lot of debt. In terms of investment, you could say it also depends on the access to capital, so the supply of capital from banks. Even with low interest rates, if banks don't have money to lend, then there will be no lending within the economy, so that would be ineffective. In terms of exports and imports, you could do it from a quality perspective, because you could say that it depends upon not just the price of UK exports, but the quality. Because if they are low quality in relation to another country, that country might have an elastic demand and they won't benefit from lower priced exports. In terms of the most straightforward way to do this, what you would want to do is look at other policies as well. So it may be that the demand side policy is less effective because you get the full capacity. So you might want to talk about how demand side policies are more effective if aggregate supply increases at the same time, because the increase in economic growth will be large, but also the stability of the price level, that target will be met as well. So the price level will stay roughly about the same on that axis of the graph. And that stability also encourages investment. So you can say that it's more likely businesses will invest when the economy is stable, and stability can be gained from maintaining the price level for the business. And you could also try and solve the access to capital and saying that maybe some quantitative easing alongside the interest rates would increase the supply of money and make that one more likely. And you might talk about supply side policies such as training and education to increase the quality of goods and services as well.